Okay, so a little quick example of what sampling is. Let's say that I've got, let's see. Got all these like tracks here. Let's grab a sample from in here. Here, we'll use this don't stop till you get enough. I'm just going to drag this in here. And I've just cut out this part of the song here. All right, so I just cut out that part of the song. I'm going to go ahead and change this here. I'm going to change it to 120 BPMs. And what I can do is, this is just inside of Ableton Live as a loop. I'm not going to play the whole thing because then we'll run into copyright stuff with YouTube and all that. But I'm going to go ahead and I got this. And then what I'm going to do is take this and throw it into an instrument here. And the easiest way to do it is I just drag in my simpler instrument, put it on a track here, and drag the loop into it. And now I can play it on my keyboard. And now I can play it musically. And what I've done is I've just put it onto an instrument here, and I can play it across the keys on my keyboard. And so this is like the kind of mainstream way that people know about sampling and stuff like that, is taking songs and then grabbing a piece of a song and like looping it or whatever. So once I've got it like this, I can go in here and I can say, all right, let's just type that in. So here, let's do this. I'm going to stop this one from playing over here. Hit this here. Got my right, so now I've got this in here and I can play that, and like I could add some drums into this. Let's go ahead over here and throw in like an 808 kit here or something like that. So I can play this in now. And let's turn that up a little bit. Right, so go in here. Right, so I've got that, and this is basically, this is using samples. And everything I'm using right now is samples, but we're using a couple different types of samples. So one is I sampled this song, this Michael Jackson song here, and I threw it onto a key and I played it in musically. And the other samples I'm using are these drum samples here. These are samples from a drum machine. So these are two different types of samples. And then what I can also do is I can go in here and use my mouth to sample some more stuff. Let's use this microphone right here. And here, let me just boom, boom. Chicka-checka, chicka-checka, chicka-checka. So we'll here do that, record that in. Let me just go ahead and solo this out. Chicka-checka-checka, chicka-checka-checka, chicka, chicka-checka-checka, chicka, chicka-checka-checka, chicka, chicka-checka-checka, chicka, chicka-checka-checka, chicka, chicka-checka-checka. Right, so I got this little vocal recording here that I did. And what I can do is I can take this, and it's a loop right now, because the way we're using Ableton Live, let me get rid of this sample here. But what I could do is I could even chop this up into small pieces really easily using Ableton Live, slice to new MIDI track, and I'm going to explain how to do all this stuff here in a second. Actually, before I do that, let me just see a couple things. Yeah, it looks fine. Go in here, go slice to new MIDI, built-in transients, hit that, boom. Now, I've got it on keys on a keyboard. Let me turn the loop off. Now I can play that, right? So I can go in here and so I can play that in. And you can hear I just sampled my voice. So this is all sampling here. And this is what we're going to be talking about this week. How to do this stuff, how it works, the different ways of sampling, all that kind of stuff there. And that's what we're really going to be going over these next few classes here. They're all sampling, but they're all different ways of sampling stuff. All right, cool. Let me just get in here. We got Tony came in. Awesome. All right. So before we talk about all that stuff that I just showed you, let's talk a little bit about history of sampling. All right. So I just wanted to show you that real quick, just to kind of show you what we're going to be dealing with this week. And now we're going to talk a little bit about the history of samples. So sampling really came from, there's electronic music. If we go back a little bit further than sampling, electronic music had kind of two paths in the beginning. There's musique concrète and there is musique électronique. Musique électronique was sounds that were made from machines, from synthesizers, stuff like that. So when they started making any like electronic devices, back when they first developed electricity, they started making electronic devices. From the very beginning, there were things that people called instruments. Now, they're not synthesizers like we know them today. They were noise-making devices. They weren't really musical in the sense of like melodies and stuff like that. You couldn't play them with a keyboard. But we're talking a long, long time ago. We're talking about like the early 1900s. Then the very first music electronic instrument was the theremin, and that was made by a guy named Leon Theremin. And it was basically, he took a metal detector that they used to find mines in the ground, landmines, and he adjusted it so it could sense the like magnetics from your body and like how close you were to it, and you could use that to make a pitch higher or lower. It's a really interesting instrument. We don't really have a lot of time to go into the theremin right now, but maybe this week we can talk a little bit more about it because it's a fascinating instrument. And then in the 50s, they started to develop more like synthesizers and started to develop more synthesizers. And that's when this musique électronique really started to kind of take off with like more like university people. And that was music that was made from like electronic instruments. At the same time, there was this musique concrète, and musique concrète was sounds that were used from the real world, samples, where they would take recordings of sounds and use them to make music with. And there were two different things that were happening. Then what happened was that the Mellotron came along, and the Mellotron is a keyboard instrument, looks like this, and the way it works is it has a tape loop inside of it that's fed through. When you play the key, it plays the tape, and that tape gets read by a tape reader thing, and you can put a sound on this tape and play it back by hitting a key on a keyboard. And I've got like a little video here. You can see this is like some pictures of the inside of a theremin. There are about 25 keys or so, and this is what the tape reels look like. And it could play 8 seconds of sound on each note. So I've got a little video here that I pulled up, this guy talking about theremins and how they work. So I just want to play this real quick for you, and just let me know to make sure we can actually hear it. I think we should be able to, but...
The Mellotron was originally built in 1964. This is a British invention, right? And you can consider this as a sampler in a way, because this is an actual flute player and these are string players. And these are actual vocalists. So how does this work? I'm gonna show it to you. There you go. So this is the internal mechanism. As you can see, there is this big rotor here that spins a long capstan across the keyboard. Just underneath a series of pieces of tape. Each key has a pinch roller. And every time you press one of them, a piece of tape rolls underneath it. You see? Let me show it to you from a different angle. Right? So here are all the pieces of tape, and see what happens when I press a key, yeah? See? The pinch roller presses against the capstan and the tape gets pulled up. And since each key has a different pinch roller, it will pull a different piece of tape. And of course, there's only so long that the note can go for, because at some point it will reach the end of the tape. And then it will go back. So it's a very simple mechanism. It's a little bit temperamental sometimes, but hey, it sure sounds great. So back to the top panel, the way you change the sounds is by moving this control here, which moves the head across the tape. So in this position, you have choir. In this position, see how that moved? You've got strings, and on this position, you've got flutes. This knob changes the speed of the rotor. And here you got the tone control, which makes it brighter or darker. And, of course, volume. So there's the Mellotron for you. I know I'm gonna play this baby for a long time off camera today, and I hope you got a little bit of inspiration from this, and please share.
All right, so that's the Mellotron, that's how it works. This is the kind of beginning of the sampler here, as he said in the very beginning of the video, that it's actually playing real recorded sounds. So those are string players, there's a choir, that was a flute, and you play it and it just plays back the sound from the tape for you. So that's like the kind of the origins of sampling. And if you listen to like the Beatles, Good Morning, or Strawberry Fields, some of those songs from Sgt. Pepper's era, you're going to hear the Mellotron. That's the opening sound of Strawberry Fields. The flute is the Mellotron, or Good Morning, all the dogs barking and stuff like that, all the roosters crowing, all that stuff. That's all Mellotron as well. So that's the Mellotron. The next thing up that we're going to talk about here, we're skipping a few things, but the next thing we're going to talk about here is the Fairlight CMI. Fairlight CMI is this device here. There are some really good examples on YouTube about it, but I'm not going to play them. But what this is basically, this is the first real digital sampler. These things cost lots and lots of money back in the day. They actually reissued them a few years ago, and they cost lots of money even still today. Like when I say lots of money, around, I don't know, $25,000 or $30,000, something like that. And what it is down here you've got the computer. It's got your sampler. This is what holds everything, and you can use floppy disks to load different sounds into it. You get your keyboard here. You've got the computer monitor here, which has actually a light pen where you could draw in waveforms. So it wasn't just sampling. You could actually go ahead and make your own waveforms with it as well. It's a really fascinating device. And it was used for some early songs where you hear some samples. Herbie Hancock used it. Michael Jackson used it. Some others. It was the type of thing where you were only using it if you were like super famous or you worked at a university where they had one. So yeah, they cost so much. It's insane. But even back then, I mean, $30,000 in 1981 money was like probably $60,000 today. So it's still expensive, any time period. Then we're going to move ahead to the SP12. Now the SP12 was from EMU. This is the first kind of affordable commercial sampler. This one here, and then the emulator series as well, were the first kind of affordable samplers. And when I say affordable, I still mean they were very expensive, but they weren't $30,000 of expensive. They were probably like $4,000 of expensive. And this thing here could record. You had 8 different sounds you could record. And this one was mostly for drums and stuff like that. You could sample drums and you could play back the sounds. And this one here, oops, go to this one. The emulator had a keyboard. Basically, it's a very similar system. It's just the one was more for rhythms and it had a sequencer built into it so you could record and play the sequencer. And then this one here was more, didn't have a sequencer built into it. It was just for recording and sampling, and you had to connect it up to an external sequencer to play it back. So these are the very early samplers. And if you listen to like NWA, those guys, if you watch that movie Straight Outta Compton, there's a scene where you can actually see he's got an SP, I think it's an SP12 in the movie he's using in there. They've got it on the kind of next to the mixer console. And that's what kind of made it famous. Then you also, after that, the more famous one, because a lot of people don't really know about the EMU SP12, the one that became more famous was the Akai MPC. This is the Akai MPC. This first one initially was made by, in conjunction with Roger Lynn. Roger Lynn had made some drum machines a bit earlier called the Lynn drum, really famous for like Prince. A lot of 80s music uses the Lynn drum machines. But Roger Lynn worked with Akai to make this MPC, and what he did was he kind of made the design of it and probably, used some made some samples and stuff for it, but he really made the design of the machine. You've got these pads here like this, and this is why it became so famous, because this was really, really playable. It was quite easy to play the Akai MPC 60, very different from banging on a normal keyboard like this. These pads made it easier just to kind of bang around on it, and these were like pretty reasonably priced. I don't know what the first MPC 60 cost, but the other ones got into like the, like around the $1,000 to $2,000 price range. Now that's still expensive, but it wasn't, again, not $30,000, and it was very playable, and you could just buy more floppy disks to like load your samples onto it and stuff like that. The EMUs actually kept going throughout the years, along with the Akais, and this is what they kind of look like throughout the ages. And they got into these, the E6400, which was one of the last ones they made. There we go. Yeah, here's the E4XT. I almost bought the 6400 or the E4XT. I'm not sure which one. But you can see these are just rack units. They don't have keyboards attached to them. You had to connect them up to a keyboard. Just had everything inside of it. And they're used in a lot of studios. The thing about these that was really cool was they had a great filter in them. The filter inside of these was really fantastic. It was a very musical filter. They were used for a lot of electronic music production, especially in Europe. And the Akai series is also, they're still used these days as well, the MPCs, and Akai went on to make a whole bunch of other stuff as well. They were not MPCs, just the Akai samplers. And that's what Akai is really famous for. Akai is very famous for samplers, and you can still buy Akai stuff today. I actually have an MPC live that I use in my live rig. And they made a lot of great keyboard controllers and things like that, and they use, you can use them with Ableton Live and stuff like that, but they still make samplers. Because what's happened is a lot of this has kind of come back around, and in the late 90s and the 2000s, hardware kind of fell off of being cool. Everybody wanted to use the computers, and hardware kind of fell by the wayside a bit. And then what happened was it came back, as everything does, and people started to realize, wait, hardware is actually really, really cool. The prices dropped on stuff because the technology became cheaper, because in the 80s and 90s this stuff was so expensive. It was out of the price range of most people. But nowadays you can get the Akai MPC 1, I believe it's called, the MPC 1, for like $600 or $800 or something like that. And that's a great price. It's a great machine. I would highly, if you're trying to get into sampling, that's a great place to start. There's other companies as well. There's a company called Electron, I think, that makes a sampler as well. Here, let's just see. Electron, yeah, the Electron. Here, let's go to their website real quick. So they've got, I don't know which, maybe this one? These are, okay. Well, this is a small one. I don't really know what this is. I guess it's a little sampler thing. This one looks like a new one. This is not the one I was thinking about, but they make some really cool stuff for reasonable prices, and they sound great. They work really well. People love them. Maybe I'm thinking about this Octatrack, which is, maybe this is the sampler I'm thinking about. Yeah, it's the, okay, 8-track dynamic performance sampler. So, I mean, there's definitely some really cool stuff out there. And plus, remember we talked about last week all the modular stuff. People make sampling units for modulars. Like, there's so much cool stuff out there with sampling these days. So it's really an interesting thing to get into. All right, so that's enough of that. That's enough of the history. And so let's go ahead and do this. Let's get into talking about some words and stuff that has to do with sampling. All right. There we go. So a sampler is a device that allows you to record audio and then assign it to keys or pads for musical playback. So if we go back into here, let's go and grab that Michael Jackson sample again. Drag that in here. So I've got this Michael Jackson sample in my Ableton Live here. I'm going to go ahead and stop all this stuff here and just play this. Okay, so I got that there. Now, the thing with this sample is that it's in here, and I can play it as a loop. I could just, here, let me just play a little part of it. I don't want to play the whole thing because of copyright stuff, but let's see if I just play half this here. And I could change the pitch. I can speed it up by changing the tempo of my song. Right? So I can do all that stuff with it, but I wouldn't call Ableton Live a sampler exactly. I do consider it a sampler, but technically it's not really a sampler because a sampler is a device that allows you to record audio and then assign it to keys or pads for musical playback. Assigning it to the keys to play it back musically by playing keys on your keyboard, that's what makes a sampler and differentiates it from just a DAW. So in here, it's in my Ableton Live. I can change the pitch and stuff, but I can't do it musically, really. I'm not playing it on keys on a keyboard to change the pitch. If I want to play it on keys on a keyboard to change the pitch, that's when I drag it into my actual sampler here, and you can see it's in my sampling device down here. It's called Simpler, and I just go over here and I can play my keys on my keyboard. And I can play a scale with it, right? And that's how it is working on a sampler. It's inside of the sampler. We can see it's playing back the keys here. So that's really the difference between a DAW, digital audio workstation, and a sampler, is that the sampler allows you to perform the music in a way that a DAW doesn't really allow you to perform the music. So if you have Pro Tools, yes, you can drag loops in there and you can have them loop and you can cut them up and you can do stuff to them. So does it make Pro Tools a sampler? Not exactly. It's still a DAW. It just means you're using it in a different way from what it was initially intended to be used. With Ableton Live, you start to blur those lines a little bit, because Ableton Live does allow us to perform things, especially if you have like a push or a launch pad or something like that. It allows you to perform things in a different way from Pro Tools right in the DAW. So for me, I consider Ableton Live a kind of sampling DAW instrument. And I put the word DAW in there, DAW, Digital Audio Workstation Instrument, because you can use it as a DAW just straight up like Pro Tools or Logic, but it also has that extra flexibility of being able to really work with samples in a different way. And that's why I use Ableton Live, is because it just makes everything so quick. And then I use a lot of samples. I work with a lot of samples in my music, and it makes it very, very easy to deal with samples in a way that Pro Tools and Logic are not quite as easy. If you're dealing with samples in Pro Tools and Logic, if you're dealing with more than just a loop, then you actually have to use a sampler like Contact or something like that, and we'll be talking about that later today. Actually, we'll be talking about a little bit of Contact today. So that's the difference between like a DAW and a sampler. So let's talk about some vocabulary here. So we got a couple of words here: the sample start and the sample end. The start is the start point of the sample, and the end is the end point of the sample. So let's go ahead and use my voice here that I recorded in a bit ago. Let's use this one here. Sorry, my dog is snoring, although I'm not really sorry. I make no apologizes for this dog because she's so cute. All right, so here's my, let's we go over to here. There you go. Right, so you can see here is my voice. Let me pull this up, move this over here, pull this up like that. Okay, so we can see here's what my voice looks like in here. So if I go in here, over here on the left hand side, there's a flag on the left hand side, and over here on the right hand side there's a flag on the right hand side. And the flag on the right hand side is my end point, the flag on the left hand side is my start point. Let me go down to, is it in here? Oh, right here. Boom, turn off the snap. Okay. So if I wanted to start my sample right here, I just move my flag to that point right there and it starts it. Right, and I can play this, we're 90, I think was our original tempo. Right, so I can do that and I can play it back, and I'm playing it back, and I could record this in. If I wanted to start at a different point, let's start it over here, and it changes everything. Right, and that's just, I mean, you saw me do that earlier. That's just my voice. I just recorded it in really quick. So that's the start point of the sample. Put that back over here. Let's move the end point of the sample like this. If I just wanted this one part here, now I just got that one part. Right. So that's my start and my end points there. So the end point is where the sample ends, and the start point is where the sample begins. Then you've got your root note. The root note is the note that plays the sample at its original recording. Now in here, this one doesn't exactly have a root note. What it does is it uses tuning to change it. So I'm not going to show you the root note here, but if I'm playing like a middle C, if I record my vocal and my root note says middle C, then middle C is the note that's going to play the sample back at its original pitch. I think I've got a diagram of this over here. Yeah. So here the root note is, if I have my sample on my keyboard like this, this is the key that plays the sample back at its original, as the original recording. That's what the root note is. And you can change the root note depending on what sampler you're using. You can change that root note. This is the simpler instrument that comes with Ableton Live standard. It's actually really powerful, but it doesn't have control over some things, like the root note, for example. It does allow you to change the pitch of your notes by using transpose, And transpose is right over here, down here, you can see transpose. So if I'm just hitting the same key, I can Now, what you might notice here is that as I'm changing my pitch of my sample, it's also speeding up and slowing down. And I know that sounds like a special effect, but that's actually not a special effect. That's actually how nature works. Because remember, if we're talking about sound waves, if a sound wave travels faster, it's going to be a higher pitch. If a sound wave travels slower, it's going to be a lower pitch. And this is what's happening with samples and samplers. A sampler, when you play it on a higher key, it's playing it back faster, which makes it go higher because the waveform is speeding up. If you play it on a lower key, it's playing it back slower, which is pushing the pitch down because the waveform is going slower. So if I play on a different key on my keyboard, or if I play on a different key, right, or in the middle here, right, it's playing at different pitches. It's also playing it at different speeds. So if I have something rhythmic like this, right, so what I can do is I can play it an octave down, it's actually half speed because an octave down is half the frequency. If you remember back in module 1, when you go an octave up, it's double the frequency. When you go an octave down, it's half the frequency. And so that's really what we're dealing with here is it's just all the stuff you learned about nature and physics, it's all coming back into play when we're talking about samples and sampling. All right, right over here, key zone. The key zone assigns the sample to specific keys on your keyboard. So your keyboard has a whole bunch of keys on it. We can assign the sample to just a few keys, and that way we can have multiple samples over the range of the keyboard. And this is what we call multi-sampling. That's right over here. Multi-sampling enables multiple samples to be used within one instrument. It's used to help sampled acoustic instruments sound more natural. You can use it for drums as well. But think about it like this. If I have a piano, if I take just one note off of piano and I just record one note of a piano and I play it back really high, well, all it's doing is it's playing it back really fast. That's not going to sound very natural. The sample's going to end faster, and I can even show you what I mean by that. Let's just go over here, and I'm just going to grab a sample of a piano. Let's go in here to samples. Let's go piano. Here we go. Here, I'll just throw this one in here. Not you. Oh, here we go. Boom. So I got my piano sample. Come on. There we go. Now, if I play this back really higher than my root note, hear how tinny that sounds? Right, if I play it back at its normal pitch, it sounds fine. And it sounds good about going down sounds better than going up, but if I go up too far, still sounds okay-ish. Yeah, that doesn't sound good at all. That doesn't sound like a real piano anymore. That sounds like a piano with some kind of effect on it. Which sounds kind of cool, but it doesn't sound really realistic like a real piano. Right? And that's why we need to sample the entire piano. So if you're working with sampled instruments, so for example, if I open up Contact over here, and I go into my library in here, and I go to my, let's see here, where is it? Alicia's keys here. This is a great piano. So this is a really well sampled piano. You can hear how beautiful that piano sounds. Sounds really, really nice across the full range. The full range of the keyboard. And that's what a full piano, sampled piano sounds like. If we go look at all the samples that are being used in here, this is all the different samples that are being used in here. And actually, there's more than this in here. We just can't see them right now because we're only looking at one group. But this is all the samples that are being used in here in this piano. It's a lot. Each key is sampled, and then there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 velocity ranges for each key as well. It's a ton of samples, and that's why the sample is like, this piano is like multiple gigabytes. It's taking up 1 gigabyte of my RAM right now. And I think the full thing is like probably 12 or 15 gigs or 5 gigs, or I'm not sure exactly for this version of it, but it's a lot. So these samples can get really big because of multi-sampling. And multi-sampling just allows us to make the instrument sound more realistic, or it allows us to put just different samples onto one keyboard so we can play it back really easily. So multi-sampling is your best friend, and that really goes in conjunction with key zones here. The key zones allow me to assign the sample to specific keys on my keyboard. So when we have a key zone, we have a low key and a high key. That's showing us which keys the sample is mapped to, what the mapping is, where it's on the keyboard. So the low key would be like a C, and the high key might be an F, and that way it's only across those specific keys. And I have another example of that right here. Key zones. This sample would be assigned to one key. The low key is C3, the high key is C3. And this sample here would be assigned to multiple keys here. It looks like it's assigned to 5 keys. The low key would be E3, the high key would be G#3. Now the 3 here on the end of it just shows which octave we are in on the keyboard. Then we have velocity zones, and velocity zones are the same as the key zones. It assigns the sample to specific velocities. The only difference really is that instead of going across the keys like this, it goes on how hard you hit the key. If you hit the key harder, it's a higher velocity. If you hit the key lower, it's a lower velocity. So you've got this here, the higher keys, the higher velocities, the lower velocities, like that. Sorry, let me just... All right. Then we have groups. When you have a whole bunch of instruments like this, a whole bunch of samples like this, you need to kind of keep them organized. That's what groups does. Groups allows you to adjust parameters of multiple samples all at the same time. So I can put multiple samples into a group. I can have like I can have these be individual samples here, but they're in one group. So like, let's say, for example, if I have a drum kit here and a drum kit here, there's like kick drums and snare drums and stuff on these keys, and different kick drums and snare drums on these keys over here. Well, if I wanted these keys here to go out to an output and these keys to go to a different output on the back of my sampler for mixing and stuff like that, I can just assign them to groups, and that way I can have I can just say group 1 goes to output 3 and 4, group 2 goes to output 5 and 6, and that way all the samples that are in group 1 would go to output 3 and 4. I don't have to change it for each sample individually. You can also add effects to these, like filters and stuff like that will really help things out. What is up, Staffo? How you doing, man? All right, here we are. Cool. So that's what the groups do for us. Then we have on the sampler, we have tuning, which adjusts the pitch speed of the sample and semitones. And so that's what I was using over here. If I wanted to change this this one here, wait, this one here. So if I want to change that tuning, I can use my transpose down here. If I just hit the same key, I can change this in semitones here. There's also a detune down here, and I don't know if you'll hear the detuning or not. It's a very slight change in the pitch. So a semitone is like from a white key to a black key on a piano, that's a semitone. And then a cent or detune is less than that. It's the between that, so it's just for tuning up samples. A loop. Loop repeats the entire sample or a portion of it. So that's what the loop does. Oh, I forgot to mark you here. I saw you put your name in, Shaw. There we go, cool. So a loop allows us to loop a portion of the sample, just play that sample back entire, like that part of it. So if I turn on my loop here, now what happens if I hold my key down, it'll just loop that sample. And if I can adjust my loop. In this case was simpler just by adjusting the end point of the sample, because it's not that this like I said, it's a little bit of a, it doesn't have that many features. Let's put it right here, and we'll loop this part of the sample. And now I can play it up high, play it down low. Right, it's playing back this loop part here, and I can adjust this. I could play just this part here. Right. And I can just hold it down. So that's your loop. And I can just turn that on and off by pressing this loop button right here. And then again, with the loop, you have the loop start and the loop end. The loop start is the beginning of the loop end is the end of the loop. And that's the really basic idea of looping. Actually, looping can get very complicated, and you can do lots of cool stuff with it depending on what sampler you are using. And here's just some illustrations of all this stuff. Let's just go over this one more time. The key zones is what keys your sampler are assigned to on the keyboard. The root note is the actual pitch that plays back the original recorded audio. The root note does not have to be inside the key zone. You can actually put the root note outside the key zone. The root note doesn't actually have to be playable. What happens is when you assign the root note outside of your key zone, it just changes the pitch that you're hearing of the sample. And when you use the root note, when you change the root note, it changes the pitch and everything. And it's something that you should definitely play with to kind of become familiar with it. Then you got your velocity zones. How hard you hit the note allows you to change what sample you're playing. And then you've got the groups. You can assign multiple samples to a group to make changes to that group. And then here's your loop stuff here. The blue part here is your sample start, and you get your sample end over here. And the red part in here is what we're looping. So with different samplers, it's not the simpler instrument. You can actually have the loop be inside of the sample. So the loop start or end points do not have to be the same as the sample start or end points. They can be different depending, again, on the sampler. With the simpler here, it's also, you can do that, but the way it works down here is a little bit different. You adjust your loop portion like this, and then you can adjust the length of the loop over here. It's a little bit weird the way it works. It's a little bit, it's not my, I don't really love using these like loop features on here, except for like special effecty things, because you can do some, like you can do some interesting things. But it's not really, it's like weird. It's not natural sounding at all. Cool. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and pause there.